There's a common saying, which is you're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job first to someone who knows how to use AI and harness its potential. And I think that's very true. I mean, you're seeing hiring patterns at Fortune 500 companies skew, and skills, the ability to use LLMs and harness the power of them is becoming a core employment skill.
Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guests today are Adam Brotman and Andy Sack. Adam is a former co-chief executive officer of J.Crew, who also spent 9 years as an executive at Starbucks. 7.5 of those as the company's chief digital officer and general manager of digital ventures. Andy is a venture investor, a marketing and branding expert, who was, among other things, an advisor to Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella through the company's digital transformation. Adam and Andy have together founded and are co-CEOs of Forum 3, an AI advisory firm. They've noted that AI is their third co-founder. They're also co-authors of a new book, AI First, the Playbook for a Future-Proof Business and Brand. I look forward to covering a number of the most salient insights from the book through this conversation with the two of them. Adam, Andy, welcome to Technovation.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter. Happy to be here.
I'm happy you are as well. Thank you so much for taking the time. Andy, I might begin with you if you don't mind, and forgive a couple of table setting points here about from a process perspective, but yours was the first book in HBR Press's history to be done in a serialized fashion. And I'd love to get your thoughts on, first of all, was that your idea, theirs? Of course, naturally, the advantages of having done so, the reason why that was a chosen path despite the lack of precedent.
Yeah, it is the first serial book of Harvard Business Press, and it was our idea. And it wasn't a stroke of genius. It was kind of a necessity, given the speed of the technological advancements, even 2 years ago, which is when we started interviewing 18 to 20 months ago. And we knew AI was moving fast. Little did we know, just given what's happened this year, just how fast it was moving. And so the idea was that we would do an interview, think about it, and then write a chapter. Our original title for the book was Our AI Journey. And the thought was that we would release each chapter in a serial fashion, and that we would have a community, and we've had monthly community calls, and all of your listeners are welcome to join the community because that continues to persist today. And that community actually played a meaningful role in actually directing the direction of the book. Our editor joined. And so it was, it was novel for them. It was novel for us because we're first-time authors. And it was, it's been a great experience.
Andy, staying with you for a moment longer, if you don't mind, what sort of insights did you draw from them that impacted the substance of the book?
I think that there were numerous points in the trajectory of the book, but as we went, like our first 3 chapters were interviews with Sam Altman, Reid Hoffman, and Bill Gates, and we kept on following that path of sort of thought leader and participant in the large language models, technological leader. And at some point, the community was like, yeah, so what does this mean? Like, can you apply this? And we were sort of thinking along those lines, but the community, and I remember one community call in particular where they were like, I think we've got the lay of the land of the technological advancement and what this is and what this means at a high level. How does this apply to me as an executive at a business? What do I do given these advancements? What do I do at my company to take advantage of the technology? And I think that was the book is really broken into 2 parts. That was really driven by the community.
Really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. Adam, you note through the book the waves of technology that the two of you have witnessed, from platform 1, the web, platform 2, cloud, mobile, social, now platform 3 with artificial intelligence. And you again, both have a wealth of experience professionally in this. And I wonder, having mined these topics with, by the way, people who are very influential in the development of each of those, to say nothing of artificial intelligence, what you see, despite the fact that, of course, one builds upon the one before it, what common factors you see across the 3 as you assess those?
The most common factor is that, like the first two waves, the first wave is really like computerization and the internet kind of, right? Combined, primarily computerization. And then as you got into the second wave, it became about, mobile cloud social. And what was similar about this new AI wave, which is why we named the book AI First ultimately instead of Our AI Journey, because we realized that the book was really trying to ask the question you're asking, which is, what does it mean to be an AI first company? When we understood what it meant to be a digital first company, and then we had to learn what it meant to be a mobile first company, we were like, what does it mean to be an AI first company? We wanted to ask and answer that question. And it turns out that even more than the second wave, it felt like this wave was more like the computerization wave, where, Bill Gates, who ironically we interviewed for the book, he's famous for the vision of a personal computer and a personal computer on every desk. And that was sort of his vision and mantra. And that was sort of unfathomable coming into the PC era. And that it reminds me of this moment where it's like we've watched science fiction about AI. We've all had versions of AI that we've dealt with in the past. Having such a democratized personal access to powerful AI felt like something that you had to get your brain around and understand what you're going to do with it. And like computerization, I remember, I'm dating myself, but Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, which were I can't think of two more influential icons to making sure that we all could have personal computers and understood what we could do with them. There's videos and conversations with Steve Jobs when people were asking, well, what am I going to do with this computer? And he's like, anything you want. It's the bicycle for the mind. And there's a lot of similarities now where people are like, what would I do with this AI? Right. So there is a similarity in that regard. I'd say the difference, though, I actually think that one of the key differences is that the speed with which this space is moving, and the fact that it's not a bicycle for the mind, like Steve Jobs said, it is the mind in a way. It's another mind, and so those two factors, the speed and the sort of the alien intelligence, the human-like aspect of it, those two things are different than prior waves and made it harder for us to create a playbook, which we ultimately did in the book, for how you can future-proof your brand, because we were looking for things that would be enduring, knowing how fast the space was moving.
Yeah, super interesting. Staying with you for a moment longer, Adam, if you don't mind. As Andy mentioned, your first interview was with Sam Altman. Very good get for you. And you recall this eureka moment you had through the course of that discussion that had the two of you retreating to a nearby park in San Francisco to absorb what you'd heard. And I wonder if you can retell that story now. I thought that was particularly poignant.
Yeah. We went into the meeting. I mean, we were there meeting with Sam Altman, embarking on this journey of learning and writing about this topic on behalf of brand builders with a decent understanding of ChatGPT. I don't even think ChatGPT 4 had been sort of around for very much time, if at all. I mean, it had been around, but barely, like when we went there. But so we were aware of the technology, we were using it, but we had no concept of where it was going to go and how fast. And when we met with Sam, it was the first introduction into this concept of AGI in a serious way, artificial general intelligence, which is where, by definition, where the AI effectively can do what 95% of the humans can do at almost any task, at almost any expert level. Not 100%, not super intelligence, but pretty much what we all can do, and can do it instantly and for free, and it was accessible. When he explained that was what we were gonna, that's where they were focused, and when he explained what that would really look like, and we asked him how long that would take, and he said 5 years, give or take. We had to take a moment of silence to sort of process, because, and we did. We walked across the street after the meeting, and we didn't talk for a bit because we were just 5 years happens in a blink of an eye. That was almost 2 years ago, as Andy just said. So if that timeline holds, we're 3 years away. And by the way, conventional wisdom, at least in San Francisco or Silicon Valley, is we're 3 years away from AGI, and maybe 5 years on the outside. And so that's going to change a lot of how you run your companies, how you run your life, how you organize innovation, creativity, your thoughts. It's going to have societal implications. It's going to do some good. It's going to do some bad. I mean, we were processing that in that moment right after the meeting, and honestly, so, frankly, coming out of that meeting, not just for the book, but for ourselves and our company and our careers, we were like, oh yeah, we have to focus on AI. We have to get smarter about this, and this is going to change everything, and we need to go all in on it.
Andy, Adam's statistics, quoting Sam Altman, of 95% of marketing work going away and becoming absorbed by artificial intelligence has got to be incredibly daunting for people that are themselves marketers. As somebody who advises that cohort, I'm wondering, what are you advising them to do to overcome this remarkable, perhaps cataclysmic challenge ahead?
During that same interview that Adam was referencing, the Sam Altman, there was a quote. It's the first chapter of the book, and there's a reason that the first chapter of the book is called "The Holy Shit Moment." Um, and he during that interview, Sam said we were talking about marketing and creative, and Sam was like, "I don't know anything about marketing and creative, but 95% of marketing as we know it will be done by AGI within the 3 to 5 year time period." And that was all that contributed to us when we were out at the park walking around and we were scratching our heads going, did he read, like, what does that mean? Holy cow. And it is cataclysmic. I mean, it's potentially cataclysmic, but I guess the good news for marketers is they're not alone. It's all categories. So, it's, and I say that, and I think cataclysmic is inherently too negative. I mean, AI today. So what can you do about it? It is a threat to all knowledge workers. Absolutely. And the genie is out of the bottle. It's not going back in the bottle. So generative AI is plowing ahead at breakneck speeds, at speeds that humans are not used to the rate of change that it is going to embark on in our society, in our business, in our government, and in our daily interactions. Adam and I, that was as we wrote a playbook for future proofing. As we wrote AI first, future proofing your business and brand. We basically did what we know how to do, which is like, okay, the genie's out of the bottle. Like, time to start to use this thing and figure out what this means and capture its upsides. And so it's incredible when you start to utilize the tool, what it can do for individual productivity in your daily life as well as in your business. And so I think, there's a common saying, which is you're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job first to someone who knows how to use AI and harness its potential. And I think that's very true. I mean, you're seeing hiring patterns at Fortune 500 companies skew, and skills, the ability to use LLMs and harness the power of them is becoming a core employment skill.
And talk a bit about how, Adam, maybe to you first, how, especially in light of that, how you've come to experiment with very intentionally with generative AI, with continued advancements in AI, and by extension, of course, what you would recommend to others to ensure that they're fully cognizant of its capabilities and aware of how best to surf this wave as opposed to have it crashing over them.
The good news about these new AI systems like ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude and Grok and the like is that you don't need to learn how to code to use them, because that would really be hard for me anyways. And you can speak to them literally, or you can speak in natural language. So the first thing I'd say is, this is the equivalent of when the computer showed up on the desk back in the late 80s, early 90s. If you could just talk to it and say, well, what can you do for me? And the truth is, in this case, the computer talks back and says, well, what's your problem? What can I help you with? And you say, well, I got this issue. And the reality is, that's how you experiment. And I know I'm being simplistic, and I don't mean to be patronizing. What I'm saying is that I think sometimes there's a fear of understanding and learning and using these new tools because they're human-like because people are afraid they're going to be difficult and because it's advanced technology, but it's kind of miraculous. I'll give you an example of how we use it. We and experiment with it. We oftentimes at our, either with working with our clients or on our own behalf, we will try to get to, some new insight that's going to drive the growth of a consumer brand we're working with. And a lot of times we will just start feeding it data. And most people think about data and AI, which combined, they think about it from a data science perspective, from a structured data perspective, meaning like, I've got to have my data in a data warehouse and it's got to be clean and it's got to be up to date. And oh no, what am I going to do? And in reality, in the last 20 years and 10 years in particular, we are dealing with a ton of unstructured data. This conversation is being recorded. There's going to be a transcript of it. That's a form of unstructured data. Your customers leave reviews for your business online, or they send you an email. That's unstructured data. You can take massive amounts of unstructured data, dump it into an AI system. When I say dump it in, it means hit click to upload, which we all can do. You upload it into a prompt. You say, I'm having this issue. I want you to read this file. I want you to help me with it. And these systems will blow your mind with what they're able to do. And sometimes they won't. And sometimes they'll give you an answer that's boring, or sometimes they'll even hallucinate or make a mistake. But the way you got to do it is you got to just do it. And you got to start rolling up your shirt sleeves and forcing yourself to try things. And what'll start to happen is you'll start to learn by doing. And that's how you experiment. And it's not more complicated than that. Usually with tech implementations, it's more complicated. You got to get your IT group involved, and you got to get some specialist, either from a development perspective or from a dev or a data scientist or both involved. In this case, you don't. And you got to learn, trial and error. And what starts to happen is a lot of people refer to it as the jagged frontier of AI. It's a remarkable system that can just miraculously blow your mind and write and read and help you discover insights and problem solve one day, and the next day it can't do a simple thing and tell me how many R's are in the word strawberry, or it just absolutely hallucinates something and it's confusing. So it's jagged, and you got to learn yourself by using it. If I give it this information, it tends to do better. If I prompt it this way, it tends to do better. And you can learn about prompt engineering and whatnot, but the latest models actually with these reasoning models, which are relatively new, they will help you because they're going to think to themselves. The models sort of talk to themselves and say, all right, Adam's asking me about this, and I think this is what he means, and I'm going to go use my internet research tool over here, and I'm going to pull in some data, and I'm going to spin up a Python code over here, and I'm going to analyze some of the things he attached, and then I'm going to get back to him with my answer, and we're going to have a conversation. And that's how you experiment. You just do that, and then you start to understand what works and what doesn't, and it will inspire you to think about other unstructured or structured data that you might want to bring to it to help you solve a problem. And that's the journey you go on. And then you can get into advanced application ideas for AI, like fancy chatbots and other things that go to all your employees or all your customers in some production grade secure way. But first you got to just use it yourself and play with it. And then you'll be inspired for how your organization can use it.
Andy, Adam's offered really great insights on how an individual can get further immersed in this. One of the interesting aspects of the proliferation of generative AI has been how it was ChatGPT, one of the fastest adopted technologies of all time, but levels of continued use in many quarters still remain relatively low. So how would you suggest taking some of what Adam referred to, at the individual level and blowing that out across teams? What are some of the effective means that you've seen used to ensure that teams have broader adoption?
Well, in the book, we actually spend, I think, 2 chapters on case study with Moderna. And Moderna, as I told you earlier, there was a fork in the book where it was okay, we're done talking to the thought leaders of the large language models, and we're now going to talk about how does this apply. And we started looking around and asking for case studies of who is an AI first company, and a couple of sources pointed us to Moderna. And so we actually had the pleasure of 2 calls with Bryce Chalamel, who I think is a pioneer and a leader in the space and really has helped transform Moderna into an AI first company. And they were one of the early beta customers of ChatGPT 3.5 and have partnered with OpenAI. And Bryce tells the story, and we go through it in a lot of detail in the book. I'll just highlight two things that he did. One is that they formed an AI council, which is not it's not a group of execs. It's not power in that sense. It's people who are passionate about AI and know how to use it for their own productivity and look to disseminate that knowledge. So that AI council deals with a lot of policy and strategy questions, both with a microscope, a near term lens, and a telescope, like starting to think about what happens when AGI is here. But again, that council's job is to help the adoption and the education and guide the corporation through really a transformation from old workflows and processes to an AI era, an AI first era workflow and processes. So one is have an AI council. The second thing that he did was they actually had a Slack channel and it had support from the CEO. And Adam and I talk in the book about really having an AI first enterprise starts with having an AI first mentality of the leadership, specifically the CEO. And so the Slack channel, the CEO would comment, participants would talk about things that they were doing for productivity gains, what worked, and also failures, what didn't work. And so those two things are things that I would highlight about bringing teams along.
Adam, one of the things I find really fascinating about your background, you were a former chief digital officer, as I mentioned before. You've had numerous business roles, if you will, but you also have a legal background. And actually, and needless to say, there's been an intersection between a lot of the work you do in technology, more generally speaking. And so in you are actually a lot of the disciplines that are coming together in some unusual ways in order to tackle some of the challenges, address some of these consequential risks associated with artificial intelligence. And I'd love, especially given the numerous lenses you can put to this, to get some of your insights about the necessity for unusual bedfellows from a collaboration perspective in order to get this right.
It's interesting. One thing about AI, Gen AI, and sort of the lessons we learned in writing the book and that we try to talk about is that it's not a technology implementation, and yet it is a state-of-the-art technology. And it feels very oxymoronic and conflicting to say that, but it's not a technology implementation. In a lot of, great work that I've ever been a part of or seen, there's a balance you have to strike around being willing to be bold and innovative and push the envelope and experiment and provide great customer experiences, while at the same time meeting the needs of the business and being secure and responsible about what you're doing. And that, I feel like with AI in particular, one of the things that Andy and I talk about a lot, both in our consulting practice, but also in the book, is that you need to treat this, whether you're doing it for yourself and you're a small business owner, or you're doing this for your personal use, or you're part of a broader organization, you need to treat this as a business transformation process and not a technology implementation process. And now, what does that mean? Does it mean you don't involve technology? Quite the contrary. You want to make sure that you're being smart about having somebody take the lens of security, reading terms of service of the various platforms you're using, understanding, when are my prompts and my chats being recorded for purposes of training the model in the future? When are they not? When am I just being, the lawyer in me thinks about this stuff all the time. Like, it's like, well, if I've got a client and I'm taking their data in, am I allowed to sort of have a conversation about that? Am I violating a non-disclosure with my client? What's the difference between confidential information versus personal information? These are all things that you got to think through. And that's why, by the way, we in the book talked about, and Andy mentioned it, this council. And if you think about this council, we also talk about an AI use policy. And councils and policies sound very bureaucratic. In fact, Andy and I are the least bureaucratic people you'll ever meet, and yet we're here talking about councils and policies. And the reason that's important is it forces you to have a cross-functional conversation about how do you feel about the way these models were trained. Are you okay using AI generated art in consumer facing ways? What about the copyright implications of that? What about, do we always have to tell our bosses when we're using AI internally? Is that a rule? Like, there's a fascinating number of conversations that we think should be had, and we don't say there's a right or wrong answer. That's not how we're coming at it. It's too fast of a space, and the issues are super complex, and so we're not being cute by saying that's not our place. But what we do encourage companies to do is, sit down. We actually have a form use policy, for example, and we've highlighted in yellow highlighter for our clients. These are the areas we think you should talk about amongst yourselves, so that when your employees or your customers come to you and ask you about your stance on that, you can say, hey, we're educated about it. We're somewhat AI literate. We had this conversation, and this is where we came down, and this is why. And I think, a lot more companies are going to have to do that when it comes to AI and be able to be front footed. There's a number of CEOs, by the way, that have recently come out with their AI first memos. No, we were lucky that they were coming out with their AI first memos when the book AI First was coming out, but it was basically a number of these companies did this, and they said, well, we're going to be AI first, and it was sort of a leaked internal memo. And when I saw those, one of the reactions I had, and Andy and I talked about this, is, you got to go into it eyes wide open that, not all, there's going to be a lot of your customers that don't understand why you're talking about being AI first. There's sort of a feeling that AI first, does that mean you're not being people first? Does that mean you're not respecting the rights of copyright holders? And you've got to, as a business leader, you've got to be prepared to have those conversations. You've got to educate yourself on what goes into this technology enough so that you can hold your head up high and have a principled conversation, with customers, with internal stakeholders. And the tricky part is, Peter, that if you have to have a stance, though. You got to have a plan, even if it's crawl, walk, run, because if you don't do that, you're going to lose a lot of people that aren't going to want to work for you because you're not being very modern in your sort of approach. But if you go too far, you're going to turn people off as people thinking that you're just doing it for, PR reasons, or you're just trying to do the latest new thing. So, that balance, keep coming back to that balance. And again, that's why we found that, having education, governance, experimentation, a roadmap, like there's a reason why we came up with the playbook we did in the book, is we tried to like codify a future-proof way to achieve that balance.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And Andy, as Adam's noting, that there's a boldness to the AI first perspective, is that is your title. And I must say, even before opening your book, I was even more struck by the subtitle and the notion of potentially future-proofing business and brands. I might add, actually, the AI first example you gave of Moderna, they're down 81% their stock prices over the course of the past year, for example. How realistic is it truly in this age? It was almost seen, given the pace of change, that future proofing is all the more elusive than it ever has been. So curious about that choice of a subtitle, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so
Further.
I mean, a couple things. First off, it's worth noting that when we submitted the book for publication, which was September of 24, the book is coming out June 24th of 25. So 9 to 10 months. At the time of submission, when the book was finally complete, reasoning models didn't exist, right? So ChatGPT, that hadn't happened. Gemini, deep research, which is arguably the first agentic model, didn't exist. And then more recently, VO3, which is the video, which has taken the world by storm, had not been released. And so all three of those technological advancements, and that's, I think, just the start of, really, we're on an exponential curve. It's just the start of what's going to continue to come. And in the last chapter of the book, we interviewed Ethan Mollick, who we read all the time and is really a leader in the space, leading intellectual, has a great blog, and and he really his feedback to us was, oh, your playbook's really, this is great. Your book's great, and you haven't future proofed your book. And really what he pushed us on was like, your book is actually tailored to where the models are today, not where they're going to be tomorrow. And he talked about how really the step function element of the technology that, every 3 to 6 months there's a step up and a step forward in the in what's in the capability set. And he was really encouraging us to think harder about that. And so we're actually working on an epilogue as part of the book, because we recognize a lot has happened in the last 9 months, really to both future proof the book and also update the playbook. And I mean, one thing I would say about AI is, like, nobody of all the people we interviewed, one thing that I took away from all the nobody knows what today brings, let alone tomorrow. And that's particularly true with the kind of technological advancement and the implications and the side implications. It's an increasingly complex world, and predicting the future is a loser's business. Um, in the case of Moderna, I would say they are a fantastic example of an AI first enterprise, and there's a lot to learn from them. The fact that their stock is down 80% has a lot more to do with regulatory and macro level business conditions, and I think that's true for every business. So, just because you become AI first, it is not a for sure recipe for increased profitability. We do think that there is going to be a break in the world of those leaders and those companies that start to adapt to the productivity gains from AI first, and you're going to see that in overall and financial results, even though there might be some macro level issues in particular industries. So Adam and I firmly believe that. We've talked about trading on that thesis ourselves in the public market. We've not done that yet. So those are some of my comments on future proofing.
Super interesting. Adam, does that suggest a necessity of getting sort of an agile or nimble stance within an organization, or orientation for the organization, so that when there's a necessity to pivot, the organization can do so? I mean, a lot of the companies that you work with and have worked with in the past are massive concerns, and steering the ship around danger and towards opportunity becomes challenging. But now, with the pace of change and the necessity to do so rapidly, might exacerbate some of the challenges those organizations have. What thoughts do you have from that perspective, please?
My first thought when you asked the question just now was, I think that's true irrespective of Gen AI.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sort of like innovator's dilemma, the need for agility, the need for leadership and growth mindset leadership, those things are pervasive even before Gen AI, and they're more important in the world of AI when things are moving faster. To your point, I agree. For example, Andy mentioned the microscope and the telescope, which is a great way to put it. The fact that we're probably in the zone now of AGI, I don't know if that's 2 years or 5 years, but like the fact that we're even in the zone of it means that part of and it's what Ethan Mollick told us in our conclusion chapter, like he was saying that brands should develop their own AI R&D lab. AI R&D lab, which is, what is an AI? I mean, he didn't mean like to develop models, like not like a AI R&D lab like OpenAI or Grok or Gemini, but he meant more like, no, he actually told us and went into depth in the chapter about the typical company that's not a technology company per se, they outsource technology. If you think about it, they end up using SaaS software and, for everything basically. And they don't build their own software typically. He said, we're going to go into an era where companies are going to be able to build their own software. And that is a weird thought. And by the way, it's not because they're going to hire a bunch of developers. It's because the AI will be on a micro or macro basis, a roll your own software moment. And it is that way today. Like but not entirely, but the fact that that's going to happen, the amount of nimbleness um, and willingness to sort of change your ways as a company is going to really get tested. Because what Andy and I said to Professor Malik in that last chapter is that he was like, you're not, Andy's right, like, you're not future proofing your book. But the issue was, it wasn't so much just that we were clear that the models were changing. I mean, even during the book writing, we were like, oh my God, here comes GPT-5, we think, and it's going to be twice as good and blow your mind about what does twice as good look like. It's already amazing. So we were like writing about like this breathless pace of change. But what we weren't, and what was happening is we were talking to corporate entities like our clients, and they were like, they weren't even getting started on using ChatGPT, let alone having some sort of AI first game plan. And for him to suggest that we should be suggesting they have an AI R&D lab where they're basically like experimenting with enterprise ideas for AI. Now we were like, that's too far afield for them. We thought, but he was right that given the pace of change, the corporate leaders today, brand leaders, need to get out of their comfort zone and not just start using this stuff, but they need to start saying, okay, well, let's think about how we could rewire the way that we are organized, the way that we build things, the way that we do things using AI. That is not going to be comfortable for many people right now. And I think that Andy and I, in the time since the book was submitted for publication, that's kind of the top thing that we're thinking about, like in an epilogue, so to speak, to say Professor Malik was right, and Sam Altman was signaling to us that this was not science fiction, it was coming. And those two things are kind of a core thesis of kind of how we are approaching the world today, even more strongly than what we wrote in the book, to be honest.
I've heard you, Adam, talk about speaking of the existential prospect for the SaaS companies, for example, as companies potentially have the ability to recreate those tools for themselves as they become builders to a much greater degree. You've talked about the eureka moment for yourself and listening to Eric Schmidt's comments at Stanford. And about TikTok, and if it were banned, that there's the ability to simply like roll that back up. I thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's the hard thing about this technology right now is that it feels like kind of like nailing Jello to a tree when it comes, like, in terms of like, where are we right now? Because there's on one moment you can vibe code like real software, but then but you're not really going to vibe code some sort of super resilient enterprise grade level thing that's got compliance and regulatory oversight. So you're not going to do that today. But when I say today, do I mean like June of 2025, or do I mean like 2025? Because it's like it's moving that fast that like it could be by the end of this year you might be able to do that. And OpenAI just released a software programming agent called Codex, that I haven't used. I think it's more for programmers or engineers to use. But my understanding is that like it's an AI software engineer. And so between tools like Cursor and GitHub Copilot and Replit, and now there's like these agents like Codex. Like I actually, in Dario Amodei talking about 90% of software programming by the end of this year is going to be done by AI. I mean, that's an insane thing to say. He may not be wrong. Like, that's how fast it's moving. So it's hard to get your hands around it. So that, yeah, when it comes to like rolling your own enterprise software, I sometimes feel silly saying it, but I actually think that I would be doing a disservice to the audience if I didn't say it's starting to happen now.
Andy, we're talking in multiple parts of this organization about how much the potential for artificial general intelligence has been fast forwarded, something that was believed by many very recently in the grand scheme of things to be decades away, now possibly being something that occurs this decade. Obviously, you've been immersed in this long enough, both in work as well as in the writing of this book, to have reason to contemplate that further. This is in many cases the scenario that so many people worry about, right? Superhuman intelligence, the extent to which this being when the technology surpasses us in our ability to control it. Do you remain optimistic in the face of that potentially?
Cautiously.
Yeah, Andy, what's your P doom percentage? That's what Peter's asking,
I
and it's a
mean,
good question.
I mean, I remain cautiously optimistic. I think, um, I think I go back to what I said earlier, which is nobody knows really what the technology is for sure moving fast. Nobody knows how this is going to play out and how much chaos is going to ensue as a result of, I'll just say broadly, the AI era and the AI advancement. There's going to be some amazing things that happen, and there's going to be some terrible things that are going to happen. Technology is technology. That's true. And that way, AI is similar to other technologies. What I am seeing is um, there is the societal implications and the economic implications are very real. And so, the good news is the human species is a very adaptive species. We're good at adapting to our environments and making do. Um, I think the fear is that it's an existential threat. I think there is potential for it to be an existential threat. I think today, what I see, and the reason I'm more optimistic than not is first, um, there's no question that the AI in the hands of the fraudsters, like fraudsters and scammers are using AI, and they have increased the number of attacks on the layperson. I mean, I read a stat that Amazon's the attempts to fraud attempts at Amazon are up 8x in the last 12 months. My guess is that goes to 20x, 30x in the next 12 months from last year. So fraud and scam, and really this, with the advent of video, the blend of like, did that happen? Like knowing what's real, like it is something that humans have depended on their eyes, and we relied on cameras and video to document the world and share images. That is not like our ability. Disinformation is going to, so fraud and disinformation are going to go through the roof here, are going through the roof. And so, humans are going to have, like, we're going to have to adapt and have new systems for dealing with that new reality. So I think the complexity of the world has gone up, and we're all strapped in. We're all along for the ride, and let's hope it's a net positive.
Adam, anything you'd add to that?
I share Andy's thoughts completely. He said it really well. I would add that the there what's kind of heartening a little bit is that um, there's some level of discussion is starting to happen now where um, the around the idea of like super intelligence and the dangers around that. I feel like around like the leaders at Google and OpenAI and Elon Musk and others. There's just I feel like they're starting to have conversations about that in ways that are seem like they feel like the probability that it's going to like actually get out of control are somewhat manageable, hopefully. Not 100% guaranteed, and that's a little weird to say, but I guess that's true of nuclear, and it's true of airline flights, and we live in a weird world of trade-offs, and I feel good. I feel okay about that. What does you know worry me a little bit is sort of the geopolitical ramifications also. I mean, Andy mentioned a lot of there's fraud, there's scams, there's job loss, there's societal, feelings of worthiness and all those things. There's the doomerism stuff, which we just talked about, existential stuff, like, Skynet stuff. And then there's also like geopolitical, where you've got, deep seek from China. I know, so we'll just say China, but I'm going to pick on DeepSeek. They came out with a new reasoning model about a week ago or so, not more than 2 weeks ago, and it already ranks as number two ahead of Gemini on the ranking boards. for reasoning models in the world. So they've developed a frontier model, which means we're very much in an AI arms race, so to speak, with China and if not others. And like that makes me a little nervous about like where does that go and what does that mean and how are we going to deal with it and so I'm not saying I have I'm not nervous about one particular thing. I'm nervous about the fact that when we talk about arms races and stuff, people can act irrationally and or maybe rationally, and it can sort of create problems that we didn't have before we had Gen AI. So, so on top of everything else that Andy was mentioning, you've got this whole issue of geopolitics and as you've seen of recent, like chip, whether or not we're going to sell chips to certain countries has become like one of the key items in some of the major trade negotiations that we're having. So it's not like a theoretical concept of what it's going to mean and our response around, regulating or not regulating AI, regulating or not regulating the chip area. It makes me nervous. I'm like Andy. I'm cautiously optimistic, but I'm glad that you're raising the topic because I think there needs to be a lot more discussion about all of these things than is happening today, and it's not going to be discussion like let's take a pause. Remember that was like a year ago or a year and a half ago. There was like people were signing letters about taking a pause, which by the way was not a dumb thing. It's just that like it just shows that we're sort of grasping at like what to do and how the genie's out of the bottle. So I'm glad you brought it up, and I hope there's a lot more conversations that people are having about it and being thoughtful about it.
The one thing that just building on what Adam said that I think most people may not think about or haven't contemplated is that the race for AI and the geopolitical nature of it, as well as the race amongst the, call it, 7 major companies that have the capital in the United States to pursue the large language models, is that there's a belief, and you're sort of seeing that play out a little bit with OpenAI, that that the first mover advantage of getting to AGI and ASI is so great, is so significant, and so that first mover advantage is what countries and what companies are playing for, and it may actually be true because if you actually get to AGI or ASI 6 months or a few months ahead of someone else, the ability to take that and deploy it and have it be self-referential and accelerate past where everyone else is what I think is what makes the stakes so high. And so, that's not reassuring necessarily, but that's what's at play. I think as when it comes to, and then what we're talking about is basically kind of control of the world.
Well, let me just to get a little bit of this taste out of our mouths. Adam, I gave Andy the first word. Let me give you the last. I was fascinated in an interview I saw with the two of you, your description of how Gen AI is your co-founder between the two of you. You have a firm together, Forum 3, and you leverage artificial intelligence as though it's the third person in the room. It's an arbiter. It is when you have a disagreement, it will weigh in. Talk a bit about that collaboration, which struck me as having profound implications to people at small firms like yours, but people at large firms alike.
Yeah, I give credit to Andy for this because right from minute one, Andy was the one the day ChatGPT came out, Andy's like, you got to check this out. And then really quickly, my friend and fellow chef over here, he was saying, we're having a lot of conversations every day. It's weird being co-CEOs. I'm sure a lot of business partners and co-founders experience this where you're talking 5-6 times a day, right? We're virtual, so it's even more like that. And Andy was like, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of knowledge that's just sort of in the air. Let's start capturing it. And we started doing that, and then we effectively were able to write custom agents, so to speak, that could be like a co-CEO that understood our strategy, had the benefit of listening to all of our conversations on some level, so that at the time that we would be stuck on something or we weren't sure about something, it was amazing how you could just go to the co-CEO agent and ask it for its thoughts. And remember, it's going to be unbiased. It has the full knowledge of every case study of every similar situation that's ever been out there on some level. And we early on we started tapping into that. And I'd say now we use it, we still regard it as a co-founder, but it's less like turning to this sort of anthropomorphic thing saying, what do you think? And it's more of Andy and I using it as our own Iron Man suit all the time, and then telling each other about our conversations with the AI and being very open about that. And so it's sort of we do treat it as a co-founder, and I think we'll go back to treating it as like more of like an actual like autonomous agent co-founder someday. But we kind of graduated to this notion, which I think is going to be how everyone's going to be doing this, where it became this always on co-intelligence that we were just constantly tapping into, as opposed to like 4 or 5 times a day or once or twice a day. It becomes always on. We're sharing the chats with each other, and it's just kind of in the air for, how we tap into it. And I think that's what's going to be the future. I think that you're going to, going back to kind of end on an interesting note, like when we interviewed Reid Hoffman for the book, he said, guys, in the next 5 years, you're going to just be used to yourself having 10x multiplying yourself by constantly being able to tap into the AI for everything you want to know and do. And by the way, there's going to be autonomous agents as well. They're going to be out there being managed by other people, and they're going to be interacting with you. And we're just going to have to get used to this world where there's agents and there's augmented co-intelligence, and it's going to end up creating a very different kind of world. And, hopefully a world, when we talk to end on a really positive note, when we talked to Reid about this, he had been talking to the Vatican and the Pope when we started the conversation. And it was about the fact that giving access to GPT-4, now, 03, 4.0, et cetera, giving that access to billions of people with smartphones that don't have access to, say, primary medical care, to be able to sort of, get on top of medical issues faster. Like, it could really change the world for the better. That's on top of curing diseases faster, on top of hopefully, helping a lot of businesses, solve problems faster. Maybe we can get on top of, energy and climate issues. And there's just a number of things that this can do for the good. So while we're all having to wade through all these weird and sometimes negative things, one thing to take solace in is that there's going to be a lot of good that comes out of this along with the bad.
Well, good. Adam, Andy, the book, as a reminder, is AI First, the Playbook for a Future-Proof Business and Brand. Congrats again on your accomplishments, and thank you for a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Peter.